VenomousStare, the Chad Henne of the StarCraft 2 scene, returns with another commentary. This time, it's Brood War, the best game ever made. And I know you guys absolutely love these Brood War casts. I ran a poll on my channel yesterday. Which style videos do you prefer, Brood War or StarCraft 2? Obviously, most of you guys probably love them both. But Brood War won out, so I decided to pump out a Brood War video here. Decided to make it classic Brood War, and this is about as classic as it gets. YellOw, the incredibly talented old school Zerg on the right here, was known for his incredible ability to make it deep into tournaments, but like the StarCraft 2 Zerg, Bisu was never able to capture that title. One of these cats who could never get over that hump when it came to individual star leagues and would always get second. And the person that he would get second to was one of the most famous pro gamers in world history and the most famous pro gamer in Korea for over a decade, Boxer. Not Marine King Prime I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the legit Boxer that owned and ran the Slayers team. And YellOw, the Zerg here that we see in the right side of Heartbreak Ridge and the right side of your screen, this was a cat who was talented and would make these deep runs very frequently, but was always sort of seen as the bridesmaid and never the bride. It was always like, man, like YellOw, the poor bastard, is so talented, but he was just never able to win that title. And we saw that a lot with the StarCraft 2 player Bisu, where it was like, well, Bisu is really good. Here we are at another GSL where Su's looking incredible. Who's going to stop him? And then, like, man, when it got to the finals, he just couldn't get over the hump. And one interesting thing about YellOw is not only was he losing to Boxer in all those finals over and over, but there was this famous finals where he played Boxer, and Boxer pulled a freaking Maru or Marine King and 2 racks bunker rush in every one of the games. And YellOw died to it every time. And then because Boxer and YellOw were from the absolute old school, when, you know, you hear me say old school, and sometimes in StarCraft 2 videos, old school means like 2010, like you were around at the beginning of Wings of Liberty. When I say old school in Brood War, I'm literally talking about the goddamn year 2000, with the Matrix coming out, and those Jackie Jr. style sunglasses, and the Chicago Cubs having like Mark Pryor and Kerry Wood. Like when I say old school in a Brood War sense, it literally means like the days of freaking rollerball mice. So back in this early 2000 era, not 2010, 2011 when Idra was dominating, but literally like freaking 2000. Like they're closer to Brood War coming out, like the expansion for StarCraft 1, than they are freaking Wings of Liberty coming out. That's how old school it is. But YellOw would always play Boxer in these old school finals. And like not only would Boxer always win, but Boxer would always 2 racks. So there was this funny thing where in the future, like 08, 09, etc., like during BlizzCons or at these big events, sometimes they would like wheel out Boxer and YellOw. Even, you know, in 08, 09, Boxer and YellOw weren't necessarily the best players in the world. It was more likely to be like Bisu, Savior, Jaedong, Flash. They would still like wheel Boxer and YellOw out and be like, alright, Boxer and YellOw are going to play like a best of 1 show match. And I swear to God, every time they did this, Boxer would do a freaking 2 racks bunker rush. Like, it's one of those things where you almost know that you're in your opponent's head and you're doing something to mess with them. It might even be like, oh, he's expecting 2 racks, or like he's sort of wary of 2 racks, and it's like, well, has he stopped it yet? No? Okay, well, I'm going to 2 racks again. So that's sort of the background of YellOw, the player, who of course is on the right side of Heartbreak Ridge here, and it's just very solid, very good for years, but he's not held in this extreme high regard that some of the other players in StarCraft history are, like Bisu, for instance, who we're looking at on the left side of Heartbreak Ridge. And Bisu is best known for sort of inventing the current PvZ metagame and revolutionizing PvZ. And Bisu is a guy who even plays up into the current day, and he has some of the best micro out of any Protoss player, and is probably the fastest Protoss player. Just an incredible Bonjour level talent. Maybe the best Protoss of all time. I would say that him and Rain are the 2 best Protoss players of all time. As we see, Lings are out here and they're trying to deny scouting. It's always so important to keep that scouting worker alive against Zerg, because you need to know if they're going to go for some horseshit Hydra bus or do some cheesy nonsense. A Hydra bus is really the main thing you have to worry about. Remember, you can't Nidus people's base in Star 1. Like, you have Nidus in StarCraft 1, but it has to be built on creep. It's not like the gimmicky fly an Overlord into the corner of your opponent's base Nidus that we see in StarCraft 2, that for the first 6 years of the game was unusably bad, and then they buffed it over and over, and Rogue won a bunch of tournaments with it, and then they nerfed it down again. So, with the Lings at the front here, pressuring the Zealot Dragoon, and there is no production tab in Brood War, but with these two Overlords sort of weirdly placed in the top right, it looks like Yellow might be going for a bit of a drop play here. He might try to bust the front door and then drop the main, as we see more cannons coming up here for Bisu. And look at that, he has cannons above his mineral line of his natural. Now, Heartbreak Ridge is sort of like Lost Temple, where there's a cliff above your natural, but it's not a true cliff. As you see, this Corsair is going to scout the Overlords. This is just huge from Bisu. As look at the Korean girls, even though it's huge. And the drop is going to unload here, but sort of scouting this and knowing that it's in your base is a huge part of it. Is double Lurker comes up, double cannon in the main for Bisu. So it was Lings in one, and the Lings are going to dive on the cannons. Both the cannons die. Remember, the cannons badly needed because of detection here, as Yellow is doing a Lurker drop where he sort of ferries the Hydras in and drops them and then makes the Lurkers. And again, the cannon is trying to be made as the Lurkers do finish. And remember, no detection out here for Bisu, so he really wants to limit these Lurkers. If these Lurkers burrow where he doesn't have detection, it can be, oh my god, horrific hit, as about a dirty dozen amount of probes go down, and the Korean fans are loving it. The Lurker swings in here, it wants to focus fire these cannons. Remember, there is no Oracle. He does have an observatory above his mineral line, but it's very tough here for Bisu, but a cannon does finish. He picks off one of the Lurkers, and the cannon is what gave him vision. He doesn't have an observer out yet, and it looks like even though the Robo is done, we don't have mobile detection. And this is one of those tricky builds where it's almost like doing a DT drop if you're Protoss, where if you show up and your opponent doesn't scout it and they just don't have vision, they die. Now, Bisu was able to scout it and start the double cannon in the main as another Lurker drop comes. And hilariously, we see the cannons from the high ground sort of clipping it a little bit, but being just out of range. Lurker in the main being cleaned up. But this is a great little harassment-based strategy from Yellow, moving Lurkers all across the map, and that observer is out. Bisu will be able to hold this, and one thing that I really like about this map, Heartbreak Ridge, is essentially like why it got its name, is there is a little high ground above your natural. And I just love maps where there are cute and unique features. And the high ground above the natural, I think, is like one of the cutest and most interesting features. Now, you guys know I love the StarCraft 2 map. It was also a Brood War map, but wasn't as big of a deal in Brood War. Lost Temple. Lost Temple has a cliff above the natural. Well, that is just a legitimate stand on its own cliff. There's no ramp up to it. On this map, there's a little ramp up to the area above your natural. So, remember, no Overlord speed is out here for the Zerg player Yellow. Another cannon coming up in the main. If your opponent is going to go for a cheesy style where they are trying to pressure with a bunch of Lings at the front and then sneak a drop in your main and then run in the front again, like people who play like that and people who do strats like that are going to be way more likely to do them again as the game progresses. Because what happens is it's like, oh, okay, as a Reaver's out here in the main, it's going to be way harder to abuse Bisu. A plethora of cannons at the natural. Is he going to try to drop above the natural up on the Heartbreak Ridge? Hard to say. He sees how much defense is there in the main, and he says, well, I can't drop on top of it. What he wants to do is burrow the Lurkers in a way where they can do damage, but they can't really be seen or cleared very easily. Another shot of the crowd here. And the Reaver's worth its weight in gold here. The Reaver gets a big shot off there, and another Reaver at the natural. And Lurkers are burrowing in, and Bisu really needs to micro his observer, get vision of the Lurkers, and start to bang down. Oh, the Reaver dies, as the Reaver at the natural was coming up to help and got picked off. Remember, Reavers are just insanely slow, and unless you have a shuttle to ferry them around in, they essentially can't move. And here we see more Overlords coming in. threatening to bulldog drop on top of the Reaver potentially with Lings, as there's just not a lot of firepower here for Bisu outside of the Reaver. Beautiful kiting, but again, no shuttle means the Reaver is nearly impossible to kill. Zerg is swarming in the main here, as losing that first Reaver that was at the natural really hurt Bisu, and cannons aren't that good whenever you can dive on top of them with Lings. Things are really starting to hit the fan for Bisu, as potentially the most handsome Korean pro gamer of all time is not only on the back foot but might be dead. He's trying to warp in another cannon in his main, and this was just a brilliant tactical little play from Yellow, where he committed hard to 2 bases and said, alright, I'm going to distract at the front door, I'm going to pressure in your main with Lurkers, and then after I pressure in the main with Lurkers, I'm going to do a follow-up push. And remember, the big Protoss power spike is Storm. And if you have to open Stargate and then Robo, you're not going to have enough for Storm, as Hydras drop right on top of the Reaver and kill it. So what we saw is the reliance on the Reaver to hold this. And it can be tricky if you don't have a shuttle, same thing basically. Although the Prism can warp stuff in, which makes it like 50 times better than the shuttle, but I digress. The Warp Prism, by the way, like an S-class unit, one of the best units in StarCraft 2. I think whenever they introduced Warp Gate and made the shuttle the Warp Prism, they didn't truly understand how good it was. And we saw Protoss players underuse the Warp Prism for years and years and years. The Ukrainian player White Raw was one of the first players to really understand how good it was. Yellow hammering away at this main nexus, and Bisu, the creator of the default PvZ strat, the Bisu build where you go Corsair Speed Zealot, has been outfought here, frankly, by Yellow. Yellow went for a really creative, cheeky build, an interesting little cheese, and what he did was so intelligent because he was able to sort of force the Protoss player to go into Robo to account for the burrowed units, and then therefore it delayed Storm, and Reavers are not nearly as good against Zerg as they are against Terran. And the Zerg player here has a Spire up, he has Mutas coming, and this should be the end for Bisu, who's restricted to 1 base. And this was just such an exceptionally exciting matchup that we got to see between 2 god-tier Korean players who are just absolute legends. And Yellow might not have the individual tournament success to be considered like a Bonjour level player or like one of the best of all time in terms of like a Mount Rushmore type cat, but he was exceptionally good for years and years and years. And this was a Pro League match where the best Korean teams would send out players individually to compete and represent for their team and try to take down the other members of the other star Korean teams. That's opposed to a tournament like the GSL or MSL or the ASL even though you might be part of a team, it's an individual tournament where you're playing the whole time and trying to win the tournament alone. In these Pro League games, you're taking turns with your teammates doing your best to defeat another team. And as Hydra slam in from both the north and the east here with Mutas diving in, Bisu's going to be forced to tap out. But what an incredible game by Yellow. Yellow shows that even though he is a few years removed from his prime, he breaks out the cheddar and eliminates one of the best Protoss players of all time. And this was just an incredible game, and Bisu's sort of sitting there to himself thinking, well shit, I scouted the drop. Oh, and this was a team called Ace, and literally like what happened was these were like military guys to some extent, and they literally made a Pro League team for Boxer because the Korean players have to do mandatory military service, conscription, and Boxer was in the military and they wanted him to play Brood Wars, so they literally made like an Air Force team so Boxer could play in Pro League. And Bisu is just crushed, so sub for more.